Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Chloe Carmichael. Thanks so much for checking out my video log about anger management. Now, one little caveat just to start off is that when I say anger management and I'm working with anger management, I'm not looking at people who are struggling with thoughts of harm to self or others. So if your anger management is so intense that you are having thoughts of hurting yourself or others, then by all means call 911 or go to an emergency room or get some help with that. The types of support that I'm offering here with anger management is more for people that just get really frustrated and maybe become very snippy and make some sardonic or cutting remarks that they kind of regret later, or they end up just shutting down and sulking and feeling so upset that they themselves don't even fully understand why they had to go and get so upset to the point where their own reaction feels a little outsized to them, but it's definitely not in a situation where they're posing any threat of harm to self or others. So with that said, let me share that one of the things that's kind of surprising to people sometimes with the way that I look at anger management is I actually encourage people to learn how to express themselves when they're not feeling quite so upset. One of the things I've observed in my experience is that what clients will come to my office and they'll say, "Oh, Dr. Chloe, can you please help me with my anger management? When things bother me, I try to take deep breaths and just tell myself to let it go, but it's not working. I still just end up eventually losing my temper." And I try to explain to them that they're actually setting themselves up to have an outburst by not paying attention to what's bothering them when it's at lower levels. So they've probably had the experience before of getting, so upset that they end up having an outburst, and they've decided, okay, well, I'm just going to try harder to not have an outburst and just push things out of my mind. And ironically, again, what they're doing is they're actually increasing the odds of having an outburst. So what you really actually want to do when you find yourself getting a little irritable, a little tense, a little upset, even if you're not sure why, pay attention to it. And how do you pay attention to it? That could be as simple as picking up the phone and venting and talking to a friend. Sometimes people are afraid that it's going to seem like they're complaining, but there's not necessarily anything wrong with complaining if you're doing it in a goal-oriented way. So if you want to say to somebody, I'm just having a really hard day with my spouse, coworker, whatever, and I really want to talk it through with somebody I trust before I take any action. I want to get in touch with what I'm feeling and why, can we just talk it through? Would be one way for you to pay attention to what's bothering you when it's at lower levels. Another simple way would be to just do some journaling, write down what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what the other person said or did that got on your skin. And if it's like a little thing, but yet you feel like, but they always do this. And so you write down maybe 10 more examples of all the little things that they do. Because 9 times out of 10, when someone's coming to me, at least for anger management, they end up with actually a good reason for why they were upset. They don't just get upset literally over nothing about completely irrational things. There's some kind of a purpose or a reason or a logic behind it, but they ended up becoming the villain of the story because of the way that they ultimately dealt with the situation. So even if they were actually starting off as the victim of somebody else that was not treating them very well, maybe they just tolerated it and tolerated it and tolerated it until they ended up really snapping and going off, and then they end up looking like the problem child, so to speak. So if that's the way that some of your anger management stories go, then what I would encourage you to do is to not try to disconnect or shut down from noticing when you're getting upset, but rather instead to actually pay attention to it. Deep breaths are good and fine to help you to get out of that fight or flight place and reoxygenate your brain and take a moment for yourself. But deep breaths are not the end all. So it's more, I'll have clients come in and they'll be like, yeah, I did some deep breathing and yet I still had an outburst. So the deep breathing is not the end, right? A few deep breaths is just enough to help you take a moment to collect yourself and then start focusing on putting into words why the situation is bothering you or figuring out what you can do about it. People with anger management in my office are often surprised that what I want them to do is actually take more action around what's bothering them, not less. I want them to take more action earlier when they're in a more productive place after they've had a moment to figure out how to express themselves. And that's how they end up creating change, working on whatever the stressor is, expressing themselves, setting limits, doing all those things that they need to do that they were trying to do with the outbursts. And obviously the outbursts weren't effective, or maybe they were trying to do in a certain way by just ignoring it or trying to forget about it. That wasn't really helpful either, right? Because if we won't acknowledge a stressor or be willing to take action around it, the stressor just grows. So the solution is to make sure that you actually pay attention to that irritation before it necessarily even grows into full-fledged anger, and then figure out some productive ways that you can express yourself or healthy ways that you can set limits. Thank you so much for checking out this video log. I hope that you'll connect with me all over social media if you're on social media, or subscribe to my newsletter, or find other ways to stay in touch. Have a good rest of the day.